What is Linux hosting and Linux and Windows differences? We should have an idea when buying shared hosting. You can often choose between Windows and Linux hosting. These different names of shared hosting plans refer to the operating system installed on the server hosting your website. We are not talking about compatibility with your computers here. Because Linux and many of its server software and technologies are open source programs, hosting packages running on Linux are often much cheaper. You won't notice much of a difference between the two operating systems, but Linux generally serves the needs of most customers the best. Which platform you choose depends on the programming languages you use for your website. Most notably, sites using PHP and MySQL, the scripting language and database system behind WordPress, should be on a Linux hosting plan. If you are building your site using ASP.NET, ASP, or SQL, then you will favor Windows. Static sites using HTML and CSS can be hosted on either operating system. Linux history. Linux is the brainchild of a computer engineer by the name of Linus Torvalds. In 1991, Torvalds was a computer science student in Finland where he created, as part of a part-time project, an updated operating system kernel based on the popular Unix system. The new operating system has been incredibly popular, and has since seen many changes and spawned various permutations, including Google Chrome OS. Its versatility, stability, and open-source code have helped make it one of the leading operating systems for not only web servers, but personal computers and mobile applications. Linux and Windows differences. Linux and Windows are the two main operating systems used by web hosts. Linux is an open-source operating system. It was the first to be used by internet hosting companies before Windows followed suit. Linux is free, it is an open-source OS. And yet, this does not mean that Linux is. Linux has turned the software world upside down. It is one of the most successful projects in terms of open source or GPL license. In terms of quality, performance, or reliability, the Linux operating system is on par with Windows. How is this possible with free software? Quite simply because the number of people who have contributed to its development is in the thousands. But the Linux OS also has another significant advantage. It can be easily associated with another open-source language, that is PHP and the MySQL database. Note in passing that PHP is competing with ASP.NET, a language developed by Microsoft and its partners, and which only works on a Windows server. ASP.NET is now considered to be better than PHP, especially in terms of execution speed, but the latter is not free. Professionals are however unanimous. PHP is more interesting for websites when ASP.NET is mainly dedicated to application platforms. Finally, a quick word on statistics. PHP now holds more than 80% of the share of the language used on the web. The price differences. The Linux operating system is open source. It is, therefore, free, unlike Windows. And it takes its toll on the price of hosting. Windows hosting is generally more expensive than Linux hosting. With Linux, hosting companies do not need to purchase a license for their servers, unlike Windows, which requires them to purchase expensive user licenses. This additional cost imposed by Windows licenses is then transferred to the price of the hosting. The price difference between Linux hosting and Windows hosting, even if it remains negligible, therefore has nothing to do with the quality of the server. For cheap web hosting, we will move towards Linux hosting. Differences in performance. Choosing between Linux hosting or Windows hosting will have little influence on the performance and speed of the server, and therefore on the speed of loading of your website. These two operating systems offer roughly equal performance. However, Linux hosting offers better stability than Windows hosting because Windows is more complex and requires more programs to run on a server. Server failures will therefore be more frequent with a Windows server than with a Linux server, although it does not happen that frequently. Keep in mind that every time your server crashes, your website is inaccessible. Databases. Linux hosting uses the MySQL database while Windows hosting uses the MS SQL database. While there are some differences between these two types of databases, they are still very similar and offer the same characteristics. MS SQL allows, for example, to benefit from some additional functionality compared to MySQL. These two databases can be used easily to store a large amount of information. The MySQL database will still be recommended for the general public and beginners. The MS SQL database will be reserved for more specific needs. Security. Linux is generally considered to be a more secure operating system than Windows, especially for security-enhanced distributions. A Windows server can nevertheless be as secure as a Linux server if it is administered by a professional. Conversely, a poorly administered Linux server will be more easily attacked or hacked. Which operating system to choose for your site? In short, in terms of performance and speed of execution, the two operating systems are equal. It is possible to announce a very slight advance for Windows, but we have seen that the complexity of the architecture of this Microsoft product causes it some slight reliability concerns. This brings us back to placing them at the same level. In terms of cost, Linux is free. This allows providers to charge us much less for hosting. This is a decisive advantage for most users, especially since most of the tools and software available on the web are too. And yet, Microsoft, which builds its OS, offers other significant advantages. Among these advantages, we find suitable software that only works on Windows. In conclusion, choosing an operating system for your web server depends on the real needs of the business. If there really isn't a real need, just choose the most affordable solution, Linux. If real needs are clarified, such as the choice to use ASP.NET, Visual Basic, or Access-type software, adopting Windows hosting is obvious. Why do web hosts choose Linux? It's powerful. It adapts well to most users. It's usually free. It can be used on old servers. It can be personalized by the host. Control panels like cPanel hide the operating system from the customer, which is convenient for web hosts. Types of operating systems for Linux servers. Unlike Windows and Mac OS, the Linux operating system can appear on your web hosting server in several different ways. Open-source developers have customized Linux into various distributions to meet different user needs. The most popular Linux distributions are Ubuntu Linux, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, Arch Linux, Linux Mint, OpenSUSE, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. The distribution used on your shared hosting account shouldn't make a big difference. The provider makes that choice based on ease of use, cost, support, and reliability of it. Large companies or more experienced developers can install different distributions on VPS or dedicated plans.